Hello, my name's Andrew from Yo Farm in Bulahdelah. I'm here today with Paul Park from Soil and Water Solutions, and we're having a bit of a discussion about some of the dam aspects on this property. Paul, would you mind introducing yourself as far as what services do you provide?
Yeah, thank you. Andrew explained, my name's Paul Park. I'm from Soil and Water Solutions, just a sole trader from the Maitland area. I've spent the last 30 years throughout the Hunter and sort of Great Lakes area, just working with landholders on natural resource management and farm water supply. So I look at assist farmers with the development of places, so helping them estimate and develop plans for their place as far as their water requirements go, and then looking at options for their water supply, be it pumping from creeks, bores, establishing dams and things like that. First thing I do when I look at visit a landholder is look at the size of their property, where they're located, so we can have a basic idea of their harvestable rights from start, and then we start to look at where we position our dams and what sort of water they require from there. So the Water Management Act 2000 brought in some legislation around landholders using water on their property without requiring licences, and a lot of that involves constructing dams on first and second order streams without requiring a licence up to a certain capacity, and that capacity is calculated using the area of the property with a multiplier factor based on that location within New South Wales. You can work out your multiplier by accessing that through the Water New South Wales website, and it's maps through each region in New South Wales that have those multipliers. First and second order streams are determined by what we call, I think, the strata method, and that details that the first, where water congregates and forms a gully at the top of a hill, is the first order, and where two first order streams meet run into a second order stream. Where two second order streams move as it flows down through the catchment, goes to a third, then fourth order streams, and so on. Anything after a third order, anything from a third order on, is usually defined as a river on a topo map. So we generally stay out of those areas. They generally require licensing and a lot more engineering input. When I'm moving on with a landholder and working on their property, we generally look at, when we work around the harvester rights, we're looking at constructing dams on first and second order streams. If they want to move into that licensing process and looking at bigger dams for irrigation, things like that, that's a whole separate process we get involved in with the water licensing section of Water New South Wales.
Paul, what sort of considerations does a landholder have when he's locating a farm dam?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Andrew, we need to look at is what do they need it for. So we need to start to consider what are his water requirements. With farms, with the economy the way it is today, and farm pricing and stuff like that, we don't want to build and spend money on something that they may not get a return on, or may not provide value for the farm, or overcapitalising. So we try to work on looking at their basic water requirements they need, so stock numbers, whether there's any small irrigation, whether there's domestic use and things like that. So we start looking at those little key elements there, and from there I can determine roughly what their water requirements are. Seasonal water requirements are for their stock and domestic use, and any gardens or fruit trees and things like that. From there we can build on taking into account evaporation losses, seepage losses. We can then start to look at their total water requirements for that 12-month period, or whatever period we require. In different areas in New South Wales might require a 2-year return period, or an 18-month return period, or a 12-month return period, depending on their rainfall events. So the key element is knowing your stocking rates. We generally know what the water requirements are for stock, looking at your domestic use, looking at your garden use, and any small scale irrigation, generally under 2 hectares, that you might use for supplement. We can look at those sort of volumes required in that and start to design a storage around that, plus our evaporation and seepage losses.
Paul, once we've determined our water requirements, within the property, what are some types of dams we could expect when we're considering the location, how they're going to differently work?
We've got options on properties, and every property is different as far as what stream orders they have through the place and what their catchment looks like and what their properties look like. So traditionally we can run with hillside dams, which we have one here. They're settled on sometimes first order streams or just off first order streams. We can run gully dams, and they're generally located on first, second or third order streams, and they have a much larger catchment. Or we can use what we call turkey's nest dams, and if you have an irrigation licence out of a river or you have a bore and well, a turkey's nest dam is a four-sided dam with no catchment running into it that you can fill via pumping. Turkey's nest dams are generally then excluded from your harvestable rights calculations, and they are filled from another source which is generally licensed. So they're the three types of dams we look at, and that will be determined by what access you have to flow lines and things like that on your property.
Once a dam site's been located, what are some considerations that are involved with determining whether the dam's going to fill?
That's a major component of where we look at where we select a dam. If we select a hillside dam that doesn't have a first order running into it, we've got to then look at, say, well, what is that effective catchment area above that, and will that generate enough runoff? So we may then have to look at putting contour banks to increase that catchment area. Within the North Coast area, we've generally found where you're getting rainfall between sort of 850 to 1200 millimetres a year. 1 hectare of catchment can generally bring you between 900,000 to a megalitres of water per year. Gully dams, when we're building gully dams, when they're on first and second order streams, we then can do a calculation to determine that catchment area. And using that catchment area and runoff figures for storm events, we can then determine the runoff yield from that catchment and then start to work out the volumes of water that come out of there. So looking at that, the larger the catchment area above the dam site, the increased ability to yield the water you require from that. And again, you generally want to size a dam that can fill for you. We don't want to build a 20 meg dam on a catchment that might only yield 5 megalitres of water a year. It becomes uneconomical for you to spend that sort of volume of money for that return. So your area, your rainfall events, and then designing dams around storm events for spillway design and things like that. And looking sometimes at your soil types. If we move into sandier soils, your runoff coefficients are a little bit different to a steeper site with clay soil. So in a sandier soil, you might only get 5 to 7% of runoff per year out of that. Whereas we get onto steeper, clayer sites, we can generally estimate 10 to 15% of water will run off in a storm event. So.
Can you talk through some of the components and challenges of construction in dam?
I'll start with the components of a dam, and for people who are just starting off in rural land areas or haven't been involved in construction of dams before, there's a couple of major things we need to look at. Firstly, our embankment, the location of our embankment. The embankment generally is the wall of the dam, and generally as a minimum, we like to have 3 to 1 batters on our dams, upstream and downstream, so above and below the catchment area. We generally like our crest of our wall to be 3 metres wide. 3 metres wide allows for vehicle traffic as well as providing that area to solidly compact the wall and provide stop it from leaking. So they're the components of the wall. That material then has to be won from somewhere. So we're looking at our excavation area for our dam. We generally like that to be upstream of the wall and below our top water level. So where our finish level of our dam is going to be, if we can, we like to take all the water, all the soil out of that area so we maximise our storage for that dam. Once we've got our wall and our excavation done, we're looking at placement of our spillway. What is the spillway? The spillway is a component of the dam that once the dam is full, it takes the water from that catchment and allows us to take it back into the catchment below the wall safely. So we minimise the risk of erosion and we minimise that risk of failure of that dam. So that's a critical component of our dam wall. When we're constructing it, we generally like our spillway as a minimum to be 1 metre below the crest of the wall. That allows for a bit of surcharge of water during storm events. Wave action when we get a heavy wind. If we get a heavy wind in a storm event, we can generally, the more the water stored, you can actually get a wave in that water that hits against the embankment. So a 1 metre freeboarder gives us that ability to allow for surcharge and a bit of wave action and give us that bit of protection so a dam doesn't overtop. So they're our key components of a dam, and really important to look at that excavation area, the construction of the wall being minimum 3 to 1 batters, 3 metre crest, and a safe spillway outlet.
We're here at the spillway of this established dam on the property, and it's a good opportunity to talk about some of the important elements of spillways. You know, where the water goes when it leaves your dam is probably the most important aspect of dam management. Paul, can you sort of go through some of those things?
Thank you. Yeah, you're exactly right, Andrew. Once the dam's full and holding water, it's basically has no retention impact again off that catchment. So any water entering the catchment has to leave that spillway, and the safety and the long-term viability of the dam relies on that spillway working effectively. So some of the things we look at in our design is understanding our storm events and what sort of volume of water comes off that catchment, and sizing our spillway so it actually takes that water at a safe rate and spills it below the dam wall without reducing the impact of erosion or minimising the impacts of erosion and potential failure. So a couple of things we look at where we're dealing in areas where we've got dispersible soils or highly erodible soils. If we're looking at a catchment above probably 20 hectares, we generally recommended that we put a trickle pipe arrangement in. A trickle pipe is just a 150 ml PVC pipe through some concrete pits. The pits are set 100 millimetres below the existing earth spillway. So once the rain stops and the water is just trickling into that catchment, it's captured through that pit, discharged below the dam wall, and allows that spillway to dry out. Because a lot of dispersible soils, if they remain wet, they become highly erodible, and if we get a follow-up storm event very quickly after a previous one, while that spillway's wet, it becomes very erosive. It's then, if they're constantly wet too, it makes it really hard to establish vegetation to give you that cover. So establishing a vegetation, having a spillway width designed for your outlet slope. There's a number of consultants, engineers and consultants who can help you understand that process and design those for you. Areas on the coast above 20 hectares where you're dealing with a dispersible like a yellow and a greyish soil that you know is going to be erosive, installation of a trickle pipe there can have a really positive impact on that ongoing management for you. When we are looking at the construction of a dam wall, there's certain things we need to consider. There might be a little bit of preliminary work. We spoke previously about doing that bit of investigation. So we've really got to look at our soil type, which we'll talk a bit more about later, but understanding the type of soil you have to construct the dam with will really determine your construction method. So there may be a point where gypsum, bentonite, or even a plastic liner may be required to help that dam hold. But if the material is generally suitable, our general construction technique is pushing our wall 3 to 1 batters, 3 metres crest we talked about before. Establishing a cut-off trench. A cut-off trench generally runs underneath the centre line of the dam wall, and it's constructed down a minimum of about 600 millimetres into solid clay or into a hard rock to allow that dam to seal. If we don't have a cut-off trench and we don't strip our topsoil properly, it becomes a point of weakness and potential failure of a dam. So establishing a cut-off trench is really important. Cut-off trench is usually 2.4 to 3 metres wide underneath the wall. That allows a full dozer blade to work through so they can cut the trench, import their material and roll it all the way through. Cut-off trenches are really important. We like to lift the material generally in 150 mil maximum layers. So rip your excavation area, run the material in at about 150 mil layers, and then roll that. So depending on the material, depending on the type of dam, how we roll that, we can roll that with a vibrating sheepsfoot roller or just the dozer tracks, and working on how many passes we need to achieve a compaction of somewhere between 95 to 98% is ideal compaction for a dam wall. There's various methods we can use to construct the dam wall, and it depends on your contractor what they have. A lot of guys will use excavators, trucks and rollers, and they can import material, run it out with trucks, trim it off and then roll it. A lot of construction contractors may use a bulldozer and rip from your excavation area, push and track roll with a bulldozer and a roller. And on larger dams, it can become more economical sometimes to use a scraper as well. Soil types and testing will tell us whether we need to flatten our batters or increase the width of our dam wall. That will come through that investigation stage. But if we typical hillside dams, 3:1 batters, 3 metre crest width, 150mm layers, compact really well, sometimes up to 6 passes with the dozer just to get that compaction that you need. And then once it's finished, really important, topsoiling and revegetation straight away. That allows that moisture to stay within the wall so we don't get that drying and differential cracking at time, or that potential risk of failure like you had here where it sat dry for a long time and then we had a massive storm event that filled quickly, and differential drying can then cause that weak point and tunnelling.
You just touched on soil types and how important they are within the construction and methodologies in a dam. Can you please just go through that in a bit more detail?
When we talk about soil types, I sort of break it down into soil texture and soil, just for want of a better word, the colour of soil. With our redder and our darker soils, we generally find they're not quite as dispersible or as erosive. Once we move into our sort of yellow, our sodics or dispersible soils, and our grey soils, which are sometimes mottled and have a lot of the fines leached out of them over a period of time, over hundreds of years, they're the soils that are most susceptible to failure. And unfortunately, along some of the coastal areas, and especially around this sort of north coast area, so we have a lot of dispersible soils around this area. So as soon as you start to highlight a grey or a yellowy soil during that preliminary work, that can be a bit of a trigger then to look at, maybe I need to do a little bit more work as far as looking at an emulsion like a gypsum or a plastic liner or a different construction technique to make that work. So soil colour is a really good indicator, and within the talk that accompanies this, there's some nice photos that show the different types of soils and their erodibility, and also some techniques that you can use to help them work better in our dam construction.
We're here at one of the established dams on the property here. We just want to talk about some of the elements of inflow and biodiversity management within a farm dam context.
As far as managing your dam go, once it's constructed and well established, there's certain things we can do just to maintain the dam, reduce the maintenance cost involved in it, and just provide additional benefits for stock. For water quality and things like that. So there's a couple of things we'll look at. We're looking upstream of the dam wall at the moment, and where sometimes you get rural roads that drain into the catchments where our dams are, or you've got large catchments above, sometimes if we can get away with putting little silt stops or diversions in those gullies just to help capture a lot of the rack and a lot of those coarse sediments from entering our dam, reduces your long-term maintenance and can help to improve your water quality. So during your design or during your construction stage, to see what you can do. This dam, on this site we're at now, we've got a little gully block. So the gully below was severely eroded with several head cuts in it, which were continually contributing sediment downstream, causing erosion issues, and then that's an issue for the health of the cattle as well, accessing through that all the time. So putting in a couple of little gully stops and flooding the head of those gullies allowed us to just improve the water quality and improve the condition of that area, and therefore the water that's entered the dam is a lot cleaner. Reduced sediment entering the dam reduces our ongoing maintenance costs, and that's a benefit to the landholders as well. So looking at that upstream, that's a key thing to consider, trying to take all the big rack, your branches, your leaves and stuff that wash down, and any of your coarse sediments that can potentially find their way into the dam and cause your maintenance in the long term. If we can reduce those, there's benefits for the cattle and there's benefits for the maintenance for that dam. We can't reduce the clay particles, suspended particles in the soil, that becomes a really big issue, trying to slow water down to drop those out. If we're looking at managing those later on, that's an amelioration with a gypsum and things like that to manage that, but that's not as critical as trying to reduce some of the larger sediments and the rack that enters our dam. We've moved on now, we've moved up onto the dam wall, and we're looking at management issues surrounding maintaining the wall of the dam. So a couple of key elements is maintaining that vegetation cover. We can see on this dam here we've got pretty good vegetation cover on the wall, the downstream batter, the upstream and downstream batters. That reduces risks, that reduces the risk of erosion along your wall and on top, and also on your batters downstream. So maintaining a good vegetation, a good grass cover is really important. And another element there is managing the wall and keeping trees off the wall. We see a lot of dams sometimes on the north coast where vegetation sort of propagates very quickly. We want to be able to manage our wall to keep the trees off. Trees, naturally with the root systems of trees, they want to go and look for water. So they'll spread out and they'll push upstream, downstream looking for water. If that tree dies or is then cut down, you have the risk then of the roots dying off, and then you have tunnelling issues potentially from there. If we're going to plant, we look at along the sides of our dams or behind our dam as included in our buffer strip. So really important to manage that. There's a lot of talk on how far downstream can we plant. There's various things depending on the various types of plants as well, but if you keep as a minimum 5 to 15 metres downstream clear, it just reduces that risk of that root spread, because roots will generally follow the drip line of a tree. So if we've got a tree right on the base of the batter, but the foliage comes over to the top of the wall, well, it's natural then that the root system will want to follow that drip line. So depending on your vegetation type, how far downstream do we manage our vegetation, those things need to be considered in that.
We're here below the dam, and here's some elements of the stock exclusion and water management for the livestock that are involved in the property here. I'm a big advocate of ensuring that the stock have very limited access to your water, but within that you obviously have to have then provisions for that stock water to be managed differently if you're going to provide it to the livestock. We've got the dam up above, the elements of stock water management within this sector. This area is a bit larger than you would normally do. It's about a hectare here, but I'm having this as a main infiltration point of water into the property. So I'm encouraging more growth into this area and requiring more actual area to work with. Within the dam sections, you can have simple gravity fed to troughs below. This system here relies on a solar bore pump that's being hung in the lower, more filtered water and transferring water across the property via that.
Implementing what Andrew just spoke about is a key thing if you want to move forward and improve the water quality within that dam. And stock exclusion, having them out of the dam, pugging up all the time, keeping that clay sediment suspended in the soil by them moving constantly through there, urinating in the water, just generally has an impact on water quality. Establishing troughs below the dam and a siphon system or a solar system allows that water quality in the dam to stay at a better level, and also you can then control access for stock to that watering point. So you can size troughs to your herd size, so depending on the size of your herd, we can get longer troughs so that they can still all drink within that drinking period that they generally have. And establishing that, we can then have troughs maybe sitting between two or three paddocks, or if you're cell grazing, you can set it up. So you can actually have added benefit, economic benefits there of managing your farm better by having a trough system implemented that they can access from 2 or 3 paddocks.
Well, thank you for your time, Paul, and is there anything else that you'd like people to consider on the takeaway from this?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to come out and have this talk today, Andrew, on your property. Yeah, for me, for landholders who are potentially looking at constructing dams, have a look at this information. If you have any questions or there's any clarification you need, please talk to your local Landcare representative, a consultant similar such as myself, or an experienced earth moving contractor. So there's variables in every site. Every dam site's going to be different. Every soil we're dealing with is different. So use what we've talked about today as a basis to get you started, and where you need to get some expert advice to help you out moving forward. And again, thank you for the opportunity to help in some way to improve people's properties.